This will be a summary of part 1 of Gulliver's Travels. Note that this is the most famous part and you probably already know it by heart. Alright, this is Gulliver, this is a Lilliputian, or maybe it's just reversed, but obviously we're going to go with this jig right now. Let me start off with the summary of his status quo. We start off with our author, Gulliver himself, going ahead and detailing us his should I describe this? His status quo, what he's been doing all this time. He was a surgeon and he is literally specialized in surgical stuff. And because ships literally need surgeons all the time, he was hired to be on one of them and he would have to go ahead and work for them too. So our author has worked as a surgeon on several ships, mostly for the ones that go around the world, and finally, after several times of doing that, he gets a little bit tired of it, so he wants to settle down. As a result, he decides to settle down in London with his wife and such, but he decides to do just one last journey that he expects to be his literal last. And then it literally turns out to be his literal last. On this voyage, there's this ship. He's supposed to be the surgeon on it, and he's like working hard. When suddenly there's a storm, and then it's shipwrecked, and then he is the only survivor. He's the only survivor left. Obviously, now he doesn't need his medical garb. He's stuck down, and he's passed out on the shore. And then when he wakes up, literally, when he wakes up, we find out that he is tied down to the ground. And then there's a bunch of these 6-inch people. There's a bunch of these 6-inch people that are like the ones who keep him captive. Let me try to draw them correctly here. So yeah, these 6-inch people who are the ones who tied him down. And they go ahead and shoot arrows at him. That probably don't even break the letter, but like they're sharp enough to literally hurt. Like he could break out whenever he wanted to, but because of the bravery that these Lilliputians are showing to him, he just stays put. Afterwards, they do give him something to drink, and then he realizes that it's just a sleeping draught. And when he goes ahead and gets knocked out, wonder how much the dose is that they've given him to knock him out. He turns out to be carried onto a giant cart. At least to them, it's a giant cart where he's being transported towards another place. When he finally wakes up, he finds himself chained to a temple. Which is mostly abandoned, mainly because this is the only thing that, the Lilliputians ever built that could literally hold him. Now the Emperor himself comes to go ahead and try to talk about him, and because they can't literally talk and communicate, mainly because they have different languages. So the Lilliputians literally give him a tutor to go ahead and try to teach them their language, and as a result, they can literally learn fast, mainly because he's also a polyglot already, and so can understand most languages. Now, along with all this stuff, he finally decides to talk sense with him. He talks about wanting his liberty, and so the king is a little bit reluctant about it, but eventually he does eventually come in, mainly because they realize that this guy has to relieve himself somewhere. So they let him relieve, and they clean up that mess, and then they have to figure out how to go ahead and let him relieve stuff. They eventually do figure out a system that works that way, but, well, yeah, it isn't very ideal. So the king finally comes back and he decides to grant him his liberty under these conditions. One of these conditions being that he cannot harm any other Lilliputian stuff, and that he is not allowed to attack any Lilliputians, that he needs to work with construction projects, he needs to help with construction projects, and that he needs to go ahead and help them and be an ally during wartime. These sound reasonable enough. So he's given his freedom, and now he can go ahead and walk freely around the Lilliputian place. This obviously brings the attraction of several Lilliputians, and then he describes the Lilliputian way of life, saying that they themselves are not exactly the same customs as us. Now, it is said that in our governments that it's based on the reward and punishment system of our laws, but like nowhere else has he ever seen reward in the system of a government. Then the Lilliputians, mainly because the Lilliputians themselves go ahead and give government positions based on like how good is someone doing acrobatics, how good is someone entertaining someone else, and etc. and etc. Now, obviously, this isn't exactly working ideally for them, so go ahead and see how these people come to head and sing about their own mates and how they reproduce and everything and such. There's no such thing as family here, at least not in the sense that we know, mainly because people in the Lilliputian worlds are somewhat backwards compared to our Europeanized kind of central government. But with that, we get to go ahead and see our Gulliver decide to finally to fight in the very first war between Lilliputians and their other fellow little people. You don't really need to know their names, but if you do want to know, their rivals' names is the Blefuscudians, and they're also 16 Lilliputian-sized people. Now, as our Gulliver himself decides to go ahead and destroy everything and help the Lilliputians win the war, he decides to do something very genius. He uses he asks for some iron, and then he twists them into it, and then he goes ahead and creates a hook towards each of the ships. He hooks each of the ships towards it, and then he pulls with all of his might back to the harbor, going ahead and giving them the honor of winning the battle. Obviously, the Blefuscudians are very surprised by this, and because they did not expect to fight a literal giant. It's like this, like they're going ahead and like, pew 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 pew. They didn't expect that they would have to go ahead and fight a literal giant of light. Well, until the day they get their own giant, this is going to happen. I like to imagine in an AR world, like an alternate reality world, we get like Gulliver himself, and then the opposing Lilliputian factions going ahead and having their own giant, because there's also another survivor from the shipwreck, and then they have this little talk with each other, which ends up in them reconciling and then creating peace for each other. Man, because they probably wouldn't even want to fight each other, because they literally have their weapons stolen away from them. Gulliver himself has a flintlock and a cutlass, but like they are confiscated by the Lilliputians into their giant treasury. There's also different ornaments inside their pockets that, towards the Lilliputians, they seem like gorgeous kinds of artifacts, but that's all I can really say about them, too. They're very small people, so they have really small needs. If Lilliputians are all around the world, they could go ahead and, well, do anything with their lives. That's about it. Alright, so we could go ahead and talk about the next part here, too. And as a result of his actions, Gulliver has given the highest title of the Lilliputians ever. And now he's literally parading, and he is part of the court now. The Lilliputian court, which he has never really been part of, so this is a new experience for him. And due to it being a literal new experience for him, he's able to go ahead and figure this out. Eventually, though, because like the High Admiral of the army, of the Lilliputian army, is like jealous of him, he decides to go ahead and try to plot some treason and stuff against him. Now, for them, being ungrateful is a crime that constitutes the majority and the highest punishment of the Lilliputians, aka death. Now, don't tell me how the Lilliputians are going to manage to kill a giant, but, well, they have managed to go ahead and probably have the same technologies as, say, the giant people, but smaller versions. So if they could somehow figure out to create, like, a bomb, if they put several bombs on him, it could probably be enough to at least harm him. I'm not sure if it could kill him, though. Regardless of, let's not talk about how to kill a giant. Let's talk about how we could go ahead and talk about how to banish this person. So they go ahead and decide to banish him. He starts to lose favor. Our Gulliver is starting to lose favor with our king, and he's starting to get a little bit worried. So he is warned by one of the trusted government officials of this plot, and he decides that he needs to literally run away. He's gonna run away in darkness. We have absolutely no idea. So he just runs away in plain old light. He goes towards the next kinds of people, the ones he was literally fighting, and then they go ahead and treat him a little bit hospitality, but then they realize that he's also probably going to be a threat towards them, and then, well, chaos ensues, and because that chaos ensues, nothing good is happening, and he just has to be eliminated. And because of that dominant kind of stuff, we finally get to understand that our Gulliver's travels himself are finally starting to get to an end. And by some sheer miraculous luck, our Gulliver himself is able to find a passage all the way back to his native home of England. And once he's there, oh boy, does he not want to go through more travels. But unfortunately, as we know, what will happen? He does go through more travels. Now, I don't know what happens to the Lilliputians after this because I haven't read part 2 yet, but I do hope they reappear in Gulliver's Travels. They definitely don't. I hope to see you guys soon. Until next time, Shihana, peace. Bye-bye.